Becoming better in any of the fine arts requires time, patience, and dedication towards oneself and your craft. The path to success is always accompanied with failure, mistakes, and hindrance. These obstacles are really the steps towards improving. Hi everyone, welcome back. This is Phil Dimitriadis, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about some principles of character design and, most importantly, building up a character. So part one that I'd like to talk about is basic proportions. So one of the things I noticed with students, what I'm going to do today for the subject matter and the topic is in our summer drawing workshop, we're focusing on some dailies, and we decided to pick fish for the first topic. So I just thought I'd cover some basics and some things that I see students do. So our first little topic here, we're going to talk about proportions. And one of the things that I see students do right from the very beginning is need to make come up with a visual term for this. I might call it like visual shape recognition or cognitive, understanding. So one of the first things that we do as artists is whenever we draw anything, we reach back into our brain and into our mind, and we start thinking about what are the basic principles of the object that we're going to draw. So for example, fish, we immediately might come up with something like this that might look very sort of typical of like a standard fish. Okay. And then it might have, really basic. So one of the problems with sketching a fish like this is that basically the proportions coming down the middle, coming up to the top of the fish. If I were to make a little mark right in here and sort of draw a line from here to here, and then if I were to come back here and look at this, okay, these are very similar to each other. They're roughly about an inch and a quarter. So the problem with that is, even though we're going for basic shape recognition from our brain, and we're pulling from our visual library of us looking at shapes and drawing, sketching, looking at art, looking at animated movies and so on, is that sometimes I've noticed our first idea tends to be the safest idea, okay? So the fact that we come up with this safe idea means a couple things. It means, number one, we haven't really looked at the basic proportions, and we haven't taken any time to really push the basic proportions, okay? So there's a couple things that are issues into this sketch already for me, and let me show you what they are. Number one is if you're to break up from here to here to here, you have almost equal proportions right in there, okay, to there. Then if you break this off, this is almost 1/4 of this, which is okay, but it's still a little bit limiting. And let's say in our sketch we might put on a little fin here, put on a little fin here. If we outlined our body a little bit more, we start to really get part of a fish coming together. The problem is that the overall proportions are out of whack. It's not really interesting or very appealing to the viewer. And the reason why it's not interesting or appealing, there are a couple reasons to talk about here very quick. So the first reason is that when we have equal half proportions like this, and they're going across, the character looks totally dull and it looks empty. It's not nearly appealing at all. The other big issue is that's sort of happening is there's no real shape that's pushing outside of this sort of, I'm going to call it like a square box. So here, and I'm going to define a little bit more of a line. If we look at this fish basically exists inside this box right here. Okay. And one of the best fundamental rules of all of design is that this shape right here, which is a square, anything, I know I drew it a little bit tilted there, but anything with a right angle in it is going to look boring, and it's not going to be very interesting. So one of the things that we need to try to do is, naturally when we start a project, we need to ixnay that out. We need to try something a little bit different. So something that we can do is, instead of that box shape, if I come over here and if I have a shape like that, now it becomes very interesting and appealing. In fact, from that standpoint, what would happen if I put a fin up like this? All of a sudden it becomes a lot more appealing to the viewer. In fact, what if I had that? What if I switched it the other way? What if I have that type of shape? Then what if I have large eyes here? And then if you come over here, what if I have a tail that's up like this? Okay, so you can see immediately what starts to happen is just me lightly goofing around, thinking about what I'm doing and changing the shapes and pushing the shapes. So when we look at this, number one, the eye sits up high here, so it's off-centered, meaning that we have about, in terms of proportion, I know this is a little bit smaller, but just bear with me. This is about 70%, that's about 30%. So basically, anytime we start adjusting our percentages to offset them a little bit away from this 50-50 rule right here, our design language is going to look 20 times better. Okay, so this is the biggest problem that I have with students who, when they get an assignment, they sit down and they do one drawing and they make that drawing. And that becomes their final. And the problem with that is you didn't push your shapes. You didn't think about the proportions. You didn't think about the arrangement of shapes. And most importantly, you didn't go into exaggeration of squashing and stretching and pushing and pulling. And when you don't, and then there's one other thing I almost forgot that you didn't do is you didn't think outside the box, meaning that everyone might go for the same answer. So how do you really push yourself and get yourself out of your comfort zone to do something totally different? Okay, so I'm going to talk about these in this little demo here, but the first things first is this is all about proportions, okay? And then we're going to talk about shape and arrangement, then we're going to talk about exaggeration. So you can see right now why this fish looks so boring. And also the other thing too is you'll notice that this marker here for the tail is almost identical to where the placement of that eye is. So this right here is about 1/4 of the way. That's 1/4. Here's the halfway mark. So we just have this equal, like 1-inch increments going all the way across here pretty much. It looks pretty much boring and stiff, okay? So those are basic proportions on why something doesn't look good, okay? So how do you get out of that? Well, the secret to that is there's a couple different things. Number one is it's your reference. It's you spending the time to look at other artists, to gather the appropriate reference, to gather the research material. I mean, here's something you might not have thought about. What kind of fish are you drawing? Are they tropical fish? Are they fish that might be found in the Pacific Ocean? If they're fish in the Pacific Ocean, would they be found around the islands of Hawaii? Would they be off the coast of California? There's a difference there between those type of fish and perhaps fish you might find if you were out in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, okay, or maybe in the middle of Tahiti. So you look all across the world, or even better yet, what would happen if you were working on a show and you had to design fish that lived on another planet? And then you have to come back and you get into more specific details. So these details, I could just go on and on about them because these are the things you really have to think about to become a good designer. And your proportions and your design ability will be reflected upon your reference and your research material. So there's a great old expression which is, your drawing and your artwork is only as good as your reference. And it's totally true. So you really need to spend that time. Now, I could cut in between this and show you some of the reference I grabbed, but right now I'm recording this with a down shooter camera on my art desk at home, okay? So this is what we want to avoid in our little discussion here of what not to do, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I start sketching here. What I really want to encourage you guys, what I'm using right now, just everyone's always wondering that. I'm using this is a Dick Blick newsprint pad. It is 12 by 18 in size. I really like this because it's very loose and sketchy. It feels great to draw on, and I just fold over the corner. One of the things that I do, you'll notice, is I put a little indent in the side right here. So you see I pre-fold it like that. See that? And then I crease it. I take a pencil and I run along it like that, and it puts a nice crease line in there. So I end up having this. The reason that I do that is so when I fold it over, okay, it's not putting as much pressure right here on the binding. And when that pressure isn't there, it doesn't rip out all the glue. So when you set it down, you just get this little teeny little fold right here, which isn't bad. And even if I'm drawing it, hitting my hand over it, it doesn't bother me at all, okay? All right, so the first thing that I start doing when I start drawing or sketching. If I'm designing for, it doesn't matter, by the way, this doesn't matter if I'm doing characters, environments, or props. It's all the same thing. It comes back to visual reads and to shape language, okay? All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna sit here and I'm just gonna start sketching and having fun and see what I come up with. So one of the things that I like to do is I might start with a circle shape that looks somewhat like this, but then I've squashed my circle a little bit. So if you look at this, it almost looks like I hit it with a hammer on the top and my circle's been sort of flattened off a little bit. Okay, so I start taking really basic shapes that might exist, and then I find a way to distort them a little bit. Like over here, I might come over here and I'm going to come back off of this trapezoid shape. I'm going to stick with that. Now, what I don't like in this is I have these flat lines going across, but it's okay for now. It's a start. And in terms of thinking of basic shapes, I can always add another shape to this, like this. See, I can put a curve on the base here, have a squared up top to it, and then that curve almost flows into the back of what might be a fin. So if you look here, I start getting a totally different shape for a fish. So I come back over here. So basically what I'm going to do, this to me is the fun part of drawing, because this is the part where you get all your bad ideas out, and there's a process that involves in drawing where you need to do that. You need to just sit and sketch. Hence, that's why we're in our sketchbooks, is because we get rid of the bad drawings so the good drawings can come out better. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here right now and I'm just going to start sketching and see what I come up with. And they're just rough little shapes, and I have no idea sort of what direction I'm going into or not. I'm just having fun. I got a little bit of background music here that I'm going to play. Some royalty-free music. Let me turn up the volume there a minute. Okay, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to sit here, go back, make sure I'm always sort of looking at my reference and looking at different fish, looking at different shapes that I like. And I just try to figure out how to squash and stretch some of these. So on this one, I flattened it off, I rounded it, and now I'm going to put a fin in here. But then I might bring the fin further down like this. Okay, so definitely trying to find ways to really push. Okay, this guy right here, I'm going to have just a straight line across. I'm going to make him very sort of sleek on the top. Then I'm going to make him rounded, sort of like this, and then I make him rounded again. Almost like he's like a really, almost like he has a, like a goat, like a goiter or a fold over in the chin, and maybe that's just part of the body. And then maybe from here he has a fin. It's like this. Maybe it's a thicker fin. It's like so. So basically, all I'm doing is I'm spending this time to just come over and really get involved into my shape language and really figure out something that's attractive. And I'm always thinking in my head, 80-20 or 70-30, even sometimes 90-10. Those are good variations. So if I can go 70% from here to here and then 30 there, that's fantastic. That's what I want to do. That's my goal, to try to be successful with my designs and my shapes. Man, you know what's funny is this really works too with cars, just good old-fashioned characters, and anything that deals with just good basic drawing principles. We're just spending this time. This is what I call the thinking and the thumbnail, area of designing. And the funny thing is if you really do this stuff and you just have fun with it, I have numerous students that have gotten jobs inside the industry. And one of the things I tell them, because we preach this at school and I preach it as a teacher and as an artist, is when you go into an interview, you better bring your sketchbook. And your sketchbook better just be filled to the till with like wonderful drawings and sketches. Because if I was working on it, which I have, if I was on a show and I was hiring people, that's happened 5 different times for me, 5 at different places where I've been asked to be on the recruitment team to help bring in artists. And one of the first things I always look for is process, because I understand the difference between somebody who knows how to draw and understands what process is and then people that don't. So here I'm sort of going for a squashed teardrop shape. This guy threw some eyes in here, just changed them up a little bit different. Oh, forgot to mention I'm drawing with indigo blue Prismacolor pencil. Okay, these pencils are sold like this. Let me see if I have a brand new one in here. This is what it looks like brand new. Okay, so it's indigo blue by Prismacolor. You'll notice there's no eraser on the back, and so I buy these couple different brands. There's a pink eraser, there's a Pentel polymer eraser. I put them on the back and use them as erasers. What I like about this is that these pencils are wax based and they're very, very fun to draw with. Okay, can't go wrong with them. That other demo I did on the alligators, which I have a second part to that. I just need to finish editing it and then I'll put that up. Okay, so anyway, here, I'll just keep sketching here. Let me start talking a little bit about some of the things that I like to think about. So what's going through my head right now is circles and squares, and then teardrop shapes. So I'm thinking about, what if I do get a shape down here, how do I stretch it and pull it back to this side? And then if I pull it back here, do I get something that looks pretty cool? And then does that establish a little bit of a flow? And maybe this tail flows out more like that. So instead of these tails being on straight lines like this tail's now, this is at an angle. Aha, see that becomes interesting. In fact, that right there combined with a little bit of that right there, and then having this angle right here, okay, there's a purpose for that. That is actually in the back of my brain. If I were to turn that this way, and if you pretend if you're looking at the human figure, okay, almost looks like a beanbag, right? What that is contrapposto. It is looking at the human figure with a series of angles, and those angles are the adjustment of weight shifting through movement, and it makes drawing or a pose look 10 times more interesting. So as I continue here in my little sketches, I wanted to point out a couple things to you that I'm aware of, because I look at a couple of these studies. What I really liked about this guy is he had lines going this way. He had lines going this way. But then right here, yeah, that was a nice turn. But then here, this is a little straight. That's very symmetrical right there. Do you see it? So there are some things in here as I keep drawing that I'm, trying to make myself aware of and trying to think about. Now I want to go for like a 90-10, or I'm imagining a fish maybe like this. Maybe he has an angle here, and he's got this like really large type of forehead. Boom. And it comes down, and then he's got a little bit of an underbite. Let's say this comes back in here, drops at an angle like so, and maybe this part comes together, and there's just a couple fins up in here like this. Okay? So this is sort of that teardrop shape, but again, going back to contrapposto and looking at these offset angles, all of a sudden it becomes a little bit more appealing to the viewer in terms of what's happening with the design. Okay? So let's just do more. I'll just finish the page up here really quick. Let me see, give me a minute here. Sorry, I'm doing this later at night. Usually I draw during the day, but oops, that's a nasty. I have a fly in my little studio here. Oh, now it's gonna keep bugging me. Let me see if I can kill it. Oh, I got it. Did you see that? I am the master fly killer. I hit it. I killed it with my ruler. Man, I wasn't even trying. It's my Jedi skills coming out. Okay, sorry. I regress. So let me get back to this. Okay, so I'm always just trying to think of how to get in there and push shapes. And by the way, be rough. Don't feel like you have to be committed to like perfect lines. And God forbid, I look over sometimes and I see students like this and they're like using a ruler. I'm like, no, the ruler works for perspective when you're doing something that's really important. Other than that, ditch the ruler, right? Go to a whole nother, just freehand it, man. Just have fun. Throw something in, throw another circle or two, see where that takes you. And if you don't like it, it's just a sketch. That's all it is. It's not like you were commissioned to build, a famous monument, and they're not going to like it and they're going to murder you for it or something. It's just a sketch, just a drawing. Never know how it is. I look at that and I go, okay, I don't like that. But I'm looking at it and I'm like, ooh, what could I do? How could I squash it a little bit. So part of me feels like coming up here, I like this. And then what if I add a little bit more to it? Let's change it up a little bit. One of the things I do like to do, I'll probably pause the camera and do this, is I like to shade all my silhouettes real quick, because it allows me to see the value, the value inside of them allow me to see the shape. And it gives me a better idea of what's really working and what's not working, you know? If you're wondering what the music is, I just found it on, just looking around on royalty-free music. Always looking for good royalty-free music. YouTube's gotten really picky about anything in the background, especially if it's like just something really simple from Pandora. Man, they shut that right off. So it's nice to play something royalty-free in the back. Okay. All right. Do these real quick. What's cool is I can just sort of see how they're coming alive a little bit, you know? This is what separates good designers from bad designers. You know what's funny is that I actually had a student this semester that said, "Oh, I don't like to do shape studies because I'm an illustrator." I'm like, are you kidding me? Illustrators are known for doing this. What do you think the American illustrators and some of the, some of the famous German illustrators that came to the United States, Maxfield Parrish and God, there's just so many different artists offhand that, Norman Rockwell, you don't think they did little studies and comps and figured out shapes and understood how things were coming together? They did stuff like that all the time, All right, so let me do a couple more versions here. I was thinking this guy would be sleek, like a teardrop type of shape. So that's one thing I haven't put on my fish yet, is I haven't been putting fins. So what I don't like about, oops, sorry, I gotta move my keyboard down a little bit. Sorry. I can move my pad up a little bit more. So what I don't like about this shape right here is it's a dolphin shape. It's all right though. Just a drawing, dude. Just have fun with it. You started something. Now you can look at it and you can remember why you don't like it. It's better than drawing it at 11 by 17 and then realizing later that you made a mistake. Okay, let's finish some more over here. So now I'm starting to get a little bit more in. I'm adding those fin shapes in, which I didn't have. So I'll go back in a minute. I'll add some of those into my other sketches here in just a second and see where that takes me. All right. what I'm doing now is I got comfortable in some of these shapes over here, and now I'm trying to figure out how to really push a little bit more with what I have. So this is, for me, the way I always work is I do a couple that are basic, and then I try to push from there. Then I think about the angles, and now not only am I thinking about the angles, but I'm also trying to think about the offset of the proportions being greater, trying to think about the interior angles, trying to think about the size of the fins. I haven't even done the eyeballs yet. Eyeballs are going to be the fun part, right? Because eyeballs can change everything. So if that's a long fin there, what has to be here? Short fin, right? Absolutely. It's going to counter it. Counterbalance. Opposites from each other. Okay? So here is a large shape there. Do you see that? If that's the large shape, that's a small shape. That means the eye should be larger up here. Makes our guy a little bit more appealing. Now just to have fun, draw a little square on it and darken it. I'm going to put a gradient going on that eyeball like that. See that? Boom. And then come in here and put a little bit of a gradient value going along the back side. Makes that eyeball look very real. I could come back and darken some lines. In fact, I could come in here if I wanted to, just to show you where you could push it. I mean, look at this. I'm still in a rough phase of just sketching. And I could just go in here and start to throw some little detail and some other little elements. And then I could go draw this character in a 3/4 slightly turned this way. You know, and that's what we want. That's our goal, right? All right, let's keep going. That's actually why I just thought I'd start with a circle. I just kept thinking, what if I was circle? And then maybe I need a round. That's way too similar to that shape, so I need to push it back down a little bit. So I didn't push that hard enough. That's all right though. The way I look at bad drawings is, and I think this is really important with a lot of just in life in general. So you get a bad drawing, you don't like it, right? Okay, it's not the end of the world. You need to look at it like this. That bad drawing, from a really positive outlook, is that bad drawing is a stepping stone to a good drawing. So that's what you have to look at it. I mean, in all of life, everything that you do is like a stepping stone, right? I mean, when you learn how to ride a bike, you learn how to dance, you know, you learn how to paint or use computers. I mean, when you're first born or like a little kid, you don't know anything about how computers work, right? You need to get in there and really figure out what makes these things work, you know, what makes technology work. And you just can't jump, no one jumps into anything without practice and a little bit of experimentation. Really push that shape a little bit differently. I was thinking of a goldfish on this guy, like that very droppy, or droopy, I should say, round shape. It almost feels like it's like a pile of trash hanging in a hefty bag or whatever. What about, let's try to do some opposites here. What about straights against curves? And when you get up here, it has to round a little bit. I like it. I like that guy's shape. That's cool. You know, came out good. Just trying to push something a little different way. What about something like this? Squash oval. So one thing I haven't tried doing yet is what if the tail is larger than the body? There it's a little too similar, but that's all right for right now. Sort of looks like a little guppy. I don't know if you guys notice it, but I'm noticing it. I'm starting to get into a rhythm. Starting to feel loose. Starting to like the shapes that I'm coming up with. One thing I didn't look at today was piranhas earlier. I wanted to get some of that and I sort of ran out of a little bit of time. I'll do that later. Remember, that was a bad drawing I didn't like. Everything can be turned into something. The other thing too, I mean, I like drawing digitally, but man, there's a feel on this paper with these type of pencils that you just can't. You can't replace it for anything in the world. You know that? I mean, really, it's so nice to feel that drag in the way that the pigment just absorbs into that paper. It's just something fun about it, you know? It's just different. All right, do a couple more over here. I'm noticing I'm getting a little. So I usually like to draw in the morning. I'm getting tired. When I get tired, I feel myself like my eyes get teary. And when my eyes start to tear a little bit, it means I'm not thinking up good design solutions. Even though I want to. the hell am I listening to? I'm sorry. Let me pause this. I'm on royalty-free music and it got a little bit too royalty-free. When you don't like what it sounds like. Let's go to another one. Maybe this will be a little bit better, right? Gonna be my depressing bottom dweller. The good news is, guys, is I'm a little tired because it's late, but I feel like I'm just getting warmed up in terms of my drawing. I can't wait to hit this again tomorrow with a little bit more energy and some coffee in me, and then see what I come up with. And, because you never know. Give me a second. I'm just looking at some of my reference real quick here. Trying to come up with some other ideas. I like this idea of low eyes. I don't know why that's sticking in the back of my brain, that it changes the look of the fish. Let me change the weird music. Let me go. Jump to the next song. There we go. What if they had spikes like going down the middle? Like. This one I thought maybe I'd have a three-eyed fish. I got a couple more here and then we'll sort of wrap this up. Uh-oh. Pencil lead broke off. That's why, that means my drawing table's at a slant here because my pencils roll. Got to be very careful. You start dropping Prismacolors, and one of the things that they do is they will break because it's a wax paste. Content in there. Now look at this guy, I'm like, I just want to cross him out. That's all right though. He didn't come out the way I was thinking. All right, so that's it. So this is my first page of just having fun and trying to exaggerate my proportions a little bit. One of the things I'll do, even with this page, I can come back here and I mean, I could develop this guy, I can develop that guy. I'd like to develop this guy a little bit more. I like him quite a bit. I didn't put as much detail into him, but I could squash him a little bit more. I like the bottom feeder guy down here. So I just spent about, 20 minutes and I came up with this page here. Well, maybe about 30 minutes. So the fact that I can go back into this and readdress, squash and stretch and see what I come up with. So this is part 1, proportions. Next, we're gonna, and this was also shape and arrangement. And what I want to do next is go back and do a little. All right, everybody, here we go. So I had to speed this up because it was over 2 hours of drawing. I was sitting here having fun and I just had to speed it up a little bit. So I doubled it. So what you're seeing is me drawing really fast with a lot of coffee. Actually, it's not. When I import the video, what I was able to do was able to convert it over and drop it down about half the speed. Okay, so it's me drawing a little bit faster than normal. It's about half the speed. So this way, it allows me to talk and narrate over it, and it does reduce the render time, even though this whole entire demo is still it's like an hour and 45 minutes, which I'm trying something new here. I still like working digitally, but I've been having some problems with my older box machine. It's a great computer. I've had it for about 8 years. That's probably the problem. I'm going to upgrade, and I think I'm going to have my brother we're plotting out to make a supercomputer with like 64 gigs of RAM. Anyway, so what I'm doing right here is I'm basically, sketching on traditional newsprint sketch paper, and it's one of my favorite things to draw on. And since I already did my little shape studies in the back of my head, another thing that I did, which I didn't show you, is that I was out with my daughter out sketching in my sketchbook, and because of that, I started taking some of my shape studies and I started rotating them in a 3-dimensional form. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that demo for another demo as a part 2 to this. I just thought I would go into the characters. So what I'm doing right now is just diving right into the characters, just to have fun and to see what comes out of it. So I like doing this. The downside of it is I'm using OBS, which is Open Broadcast System. It has its own recording software, and I have an HD camera set up. What's really cool is I can really get lots of finite detail because I'm recording this in 1080p with a huge amount of buffering, and the buffering really makes the video and the drawing details sort of hold up. The downside to this is having to import this into another video software, having to take off the sound, having to compress it down, and so on. So what I'm doing here, basically by taking my drawings, I really like doing this because I'm just sort of more comfortable drawing naturally sometimes at my desk. This way I can record myself drawing, and it allows me to sort of block out a whole entire sketch, and I can just hit record. The downside of it is it takes quite a long time for me to process this, take off the audio and so on, but that's just the way it is, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at my shapes next to me while I'm working on this. In fact, as I'm sitting here, I'm going to wrinkle it. It's right here in the background. This is why, as an artist, as an animation artist, as someone who worked in animation for 17 years, as an educator, teacher, it irks me to all high hell when I have students that don't want to spend the time to do the sorry, I don't mean to say hell, but anyway, just they don't spend the time to do the thumbnails and just to sketch, and they really think that it's just pure ignorance. They really think that being a good artist and drawing is diving right into a finished drawing, and it's not, because that's not the way our brains work. That's not the way our processes work. In fact, if anything, that's you demonstrating your inability to really understand how artists work and think, and it's you pushing yourself to the end thinking that you can knock out a good drawing. Now, some of you might be like, well, look, Phil, you're knocking out a drawing here. I really like what you're doing. But you know what, though? I've had a lot more practice and I've had a lot more years of drawing than you guys. So it's imperative as young artists, what you guys have to do is you have to take the time to, if you add it all together, I had this huge page of, what size was this? I'm sorry, I'm looking, of 12 by 18 thumbnails, and then I had 2 more sketches in my sketchbook that I did. I started a new sketchbook on a different type of paper, so I thought I'd show that later. And now I'm just going to sit here and start blocking out my images, you know, and just having fun. So one of the things I like to do when I draw here is I like drawing with my pencil on its side. And there's a reason for this. And the reason for this, folks, is when you're holding your pencil sideways, you're not drawing from your wrist anymore. You're drawing from the top of your shoulder, which means your range of motion is going to be about 360 degrees in a full circle. And if you've ever gone to a figure drawing class, that's why people are drawing with their pencil held sideways, is because it allows you to be more gestural, more sketchy. And the other biggie is it prevents you from rendering. You'll notice whenever I hold my pencil in the normal format like I am right now, that's when I'm rendering or I put in some type of little detail. As soon as I'm done with my detail, I go back to blocking in. Now, I'm not adding a ton of detail right now. What I'm actually doing is I'm going into my drawing and I'm figuring out where lines and other elements are going to be, and I do that by drawing with my pencil sideways. It is so important, and I know some of you might do it and be like, nah, it doesn't quite work, it doesn't feel right, but trust me, it totally works. And the downside of drawing with your pencil up all the time is you're going to start to render. And actually, a golden secret of drawing is being able to sit and hold your pencil sideways and hold it and just sketch with it, because you're loose, you're happy, it's free, and then you avoid diving into the render and you can block something out 10 times faster. In fact, if you wanted to, a great idea is just to get a sketchbook, call it your block-in sketchbook, where you just draw with a pencil on its side and you just go through and you block it, okay? Simple, easy peasy, that's all it has to be. It doesn't have to be any bit more complicated than that, okay? All right, so, God, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing this. I was trying to get back into the swing of things. The semester's over, and God, I never thought I would be. I'm like 6 demos behind because I just need to get back over and start, editing, and it just takes up so much more time. But it's all right. I have a little bit of free time this summer, and I should be able to get quite a bit more out. And I really like this. I'm also have a fellow student of mine coming over who's going to get me set up on Twitch and Restream and a couple other, and YouTube, of course, all in one off of OBS. And I'm going to start to live stream a little bit. Now, as I'm sketching these, I am looking over, even though I sped this up, here's that noise. Ready? It's the noise of thumbnails. It's the noise of sketching before you draw. It's the noise of figuring out what it is you want to do and figuring out what it's going to look like. It's understanding shape language. And the fact that I could sit out and pre-comp and sketch some shapes and think about shape language, that is huge because it allows me to dive into a drawing. So here's sort of my golden rule. If I've been drawing for this many years and hanging around, working with so many different artists, work in animation and in games and so on, and sketching and just, having a good time, and you pick up so much from all these people. And if I need to spend 2 hours to get into the subject matter at a minimum, that means you should be spending about 4 to 5 or 6. Aha, look, I pulled it back out just to show you again, right? Because it's right next to me, you just don't see it, but I'm looking up. I have a secondary monitor and I have that taped to my monitor screen, and I'm looking at it to figure out what my shapes are going to be. All right, so I have another fish I want to put back in here. I want to try to get 5 in because I like prime numbers, and I think prime numbers are better for design. However, though, I wanted the fish in the back to be like this huge, ugly looking monstrosity, bottom feeder, weirdo fish that, I don't know, just like isn't too friendly. Maybe he's grumpy and he's old and he doesn't like the younger fish. And so anyway, I was trying to go for a couple different personalities in here. I was trying to go for the guy on the left that I just did was like a little piranha guy with the little scales there. Then the guy on the right is supposed to be like my eager, I think of him as Spaz. Spaz is a pug I have, and Spaz is super hyper and energetic, and he's always like bouncing around the walls. Even as an older dog, he's just like, that's why we call him Spaz, is because he's literally on drugs and crack cocaine on a regular basis, and he's like bouncing off the wall. So I thought this fish would be like Spaz. It'd be shaped like a diamond wedge, like a spear, and he would be like constantly swimming around and super happy and just, like super excited. The other fish on the bottom, I was going for a very small and short but cute shape. When you were watching some of my earlier sketches, I sort of hit that shape already. So I had an idea. It was sort of an upside down V shape with eyeballs in it, very large eyeballs. Okay. So now on my fish in the back here, I'm thinking, man, what if I have them like this sort of crustaceous, like scales, almost like a dinosaur? So as I'm doing my little sketches here, I did peek over it in one of my reference books on dinosaurs, and I took a look and I started thinking about, if I have fish that are under the ocean, that are just, really deep, maybe some have these sort of crustaceous, just weird sort of volcanic little crusties on their head and stuff. Anyway, it just sort of helps me go back into that fish category. Now what I'm going to try to do here, I hope I didn't block too much of this because I forgot I was drawing to the right side here, but I wanted to sketch another fish in here, maybe a low jaw, sort of grumpy guy with lots of teeth on the bottom. So one of the things that I like to do whenever I draw, by the way, there's my circle, there's my center line, there's my eyes, right? Simple construction. See that, folks? In fact, every one of these fish I started, they were based off of simple construction. There's no detail in there. Okay, I am putting the teeth in real quick, but look, I have the construction. I have a center line that goes down the base of the head. In fact, I already know, tell you what, I have students that have told me they want some demos. I would like to ask you guys to maybe give me a little comment about what would you like in a demo, because I know I need to talk about center lines. I talked about it a little bit in my basic drawing class, and then I have some students like totally wigging out, not really getting it. And I think fish are actually a good way to talk about center lines, so I think I'm going to dive back into that a little bit later. Anyway, so just jamming away, sketching. It's funny, this guy's like a low jaw, maybe I was thinking piranha, but I don't know. There's just so many different fish. And by the way, the other thing I did cheat on, and I will admit to cheating, is I didn't even grab too much reference. All I have right now is about 4 images of reference. Usually, if I was doing this on a studio basis or working on a project for like a DVD or a movie or something, I would go in and I would really gather my reference. In fact, one of the first things I would show a client, or what we call like a bullpen. Bullpen is when you have a meeting in a large room when you're working with like your director and your story supervisor and your producers. I would show them my reference before I even started sketching, because I would get ideas of what they were thinking. Now, for this, I just sort of looked at a couple different things and then just jumped off of it. But to be honest with you, I already know that's going to be a little bit of a weakness for me, because I'm sort of making stuff out of my head as I go, versus if I had the opportunity to do a little bit more reference, that reference can come back and really aid me in part of my design solutions. Okay. I did notice when I started this, also as I'm voicing over it right now, I did have to stop and take little breaks in the middle there sometimes. There has been like 1 or 2 occasions where OBS crashed on me and I lost some of the recording footage that I have. It really doesn't happen that often, but it's just that I'm trying to get into this like 4K recording. And so by having something super high res, 1080, really large scale, and this was actually, there was another option. It was like 360 DPI, and I dropped that down to 2832, I believe, and then I had to drop it back down to 1080p because the file sizes were huge. Just to give you an idea, a 10-minute recording of this, about a 30-minute recording of me sketching characters came out to be about 15 gigabytes in size. You're like, wow, how can that be? And part of it's because I had all the it's all the buffering in there that keeps the footage nice and crisp. Anyway, so if you look here, except for my kneaded eraser sitting there in the middle, and yes, by the way, someone did ask me that question the other day. I have different kneaded erasers. I have a red one. I use one only for blue. I use one for violet, and I use one for black. And there's a reason for that, because I don't want the pigment, little shards of pigment getting mixed inside there. And then if that gets mixed up and I go to erase, it's going to smear it. Okay. So just in case while we're working on this, I know I'm talking a lot, but I'm just trying to keep you guys entertained through this. I've already figured out what my shapes are, and I did that in my thumbnail studies. And here's one of the important things I just want to go over really quick. What I'm starting to do right here is I looked back at my thumbnail studies. I didn't have a lot of center lines, and I didn't have any lines wrapping over the body. So now I'm trying to figure out how parts of the body are going to wrap over. Do the eye sockets drop in? Do they pop out? What kind of contour lines wrap around the form of the fish, which is going to be really important. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm making sure in terms of my line weight, so my contour line, my thick and thin line, I want to keep my line, only like detailed around the face. And then I want everything else to be a little bit rough. And the reason for that is that if I put a ton of detail into a back fin, then the fin's going to pop and it's not going to look right. So I need to make sure I sort of keep you focused on the characters themselves. And there's a couple ways that I could do that, because what's happening now is I have shape down here and I'm starting to leave the visual read of the shapes, right? Okay, so the next thing that happens is now we're going into contour line. I'm using my line to wrap around the body to show shape and form. And there are two different ways that I could do that. One is I can wrap, if you have a center line that exists, so it's showing the line going down the center of the face, making sure the eyes feel equal, making sure the fins feel equal. That's going to help give your drawing a little bit of perspective, and it's going to show a sense that there's a middle line going down it. In fact, when you think about it, as human beings, all the other creatures on this planet, pretty much everything else exists with a symmetry line going down it. So it's really easy to put that into your drawing, and if you add that in, it starts making your characters, your images, and your fish look realistic. Okay? All right, so and then the other thing I like to do is when I do my line, I'm always just thick and thin pressure. Like I press down, and as I drag it, then I go to thin. I drag it, again, I go to thin. So it's thick to thin, thick to thin. I'm never holding down. I have some students that take a Prismacolor pencil or a pen, and they're like, "Argh!" and they're just making this super thick line. And you don't have to do that. You have to treat it with love and tenderness, and you have to slowly get that line to go over, and you have to really feel it. It's like listening to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony or his Ninth Symphony, or it's like sketching something. If you sit there and press down super hard on the pencil, it's not going to look right. So part of what I'm doing now, going in, leaving the shape language, is going into the form, and then as I go into form, I'm wrapping the body with a series of lines, and then I'm also starting to add in detail. And what's really important is I add in these little details. It's funny, I don't think of them as like a ton of detail, but I think of them is little details that go onto the body, and they help wrap around the form of the body. And if you can do that correctly, you're actually showing the viewer how the body feels correct, and that this particular character or drawing, and it doesn't have to be a character, it could be a vehicle that you're doing. You know, vehicles have detail on them. They could have rust or dirt or whatever. So anytime that you're drawing, you need to really get in there, and you want to use your detail to help wrap part of the shape and the form. Look at right here, I put a little bit of a core shadow on the back of that eye because I'm imagining my light coming from my upper left-hand corner a little bit. So all my characters should have a little bit of a core shadow on the right side of an eye. And then if you notice that next to that core shadow, I have a little bit of that reflective light just by dragging my pencil over, not quite touching the edge. It just helps round that shape a little bit more, and it helps the character feel realistic. Okay, so all together, if you're wondering how much time did I spend into this, well, I have about, and what I'm looking at the time recorder, I have about an hour long of drawing that I doubled. So altogether, it took me about 2 hours to finish this piece here. And you know, there are some good and bads. I mean, that's me taking a couple breaks in between there, you know, and of course having distractions at the house, you know, having kids and having to do other things like make dinner and feed the dogs and take them out to go to the bathroom, all that good stuff. Anyway, so try to get more fins in here. Always, if I have a fin wrapping over the body, I want to make it go smaller. I want to have it reduced in size because then it feels like there's what we call a change in scale. So when things recede away from you and they get smaller and smaller, and then you get that feel. Okay. Not trying to render too much, but there's a couple places in here I just like to throw. Like if I know it's a detail or a focal point, I'll throw the pencil on its side and then want to go in there and pop out a lip or you know, get part of a shape. You know, I'm trying to get this texture to wrap around that form of the fish and make it look like it's realistic. Okay. And one of the great things about working on this technique, it's just, I mean, literally, this is a $1 pencil. It's a Prismacolor Indigo Blue. Okay, that's it. And you know it's a Prismacolor Indigo Blue because they have no erasers on the tip. It's not a Verithin. Verithin pencils suck. They have glue in them. They're no good. It's not a Kohl erase. A Kohl erase it's a different type of pigment. It's great for sketching. It's not great for rendering because it does not go into darker values. However, though, a Prismacolor pencil does go into darker values, and you can see how I can get nice little soft areas right here of detail, and then I could come back and I could really push, and then I can really pop that detail out and get a real dark in there if I want. And the other great thing is if you have like a little, I have an old little glasses I have a little cloth towel for my glasses, an old pair of glasses that I can use, and I'm using it right here, and I'm just sort of smearing a little bit around. By smearing it, what it does is it creates a little bit of a base foundation, and then it knocks the values down. The one downside to it, if you smear too much, it becomes a little too blue, a little bit too smeared. But what's great is you can smear just a little bit, and it really helps some of the textures on a character, or it just helps with what I'm going to call gradient buildup. So one of my goals that I'm always trying to do is I'm trying to have a series of gradations or gradients around a character. And what these gradients are going to do is they're sort of going to, you know, create areas of interest, and it's also about building up tones. So if I build up tones and push something back, I want it to have more tone. If I want to pull something forward, I want there to be more highlights and, you know, a little bit more texture or detail around it. This guy's tough right here because he's sort of a huge fish, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how I get him to fit in here. And as I did this, I just realized, you know what? I went to get these erasers. These are a Pentel slip-on eraser. They're great. High polymer eraser right there. On Amazon, they're like $9. They can slip on the top. They work really great for erasing. They have a nice wedge to them. So I know it sounds crazy, but when I'm drawing, I am using like a whole bunch of different erasers because they all do something different. My kneaded eraser is great for knocking down value. My Pentel is great for erasing drawings back down to the paper. Even the pink eraser that goes on the top, that's like a good average eraser that's good for just erasing light little sketches and so on. So I mean, I think whenever I'm sketching, I always have, I don't know, I'd say probably one or two different, the same pencil, but maybe 2 to 3 different lengths of the pencil. Sometimes they're longer, sometimes they're more blunt. That way it allows me to draw a little bit easier. I'm going to get this lower eye like he's looking down at the fish below there on the front here. Put a little bit of value in there, smudge it a little bit. So you'll notice I really push the darker values on the eyeballs themselves. I don't want to get too dark on the eyes, because if you do, you can kill the eye. Eyes have gradations in them all the time. And a really simple, easy way to learn how to do an eye is just to pull up pictures of a human eye and copy it. And you'll quickly learn, you have the iris, you have the pupil, you have a reflective light, because eyes are usually wet. Yes, I am giving some more human characteristics. Look at that. See that? Dragging the pencil on its side right there creates that little bit of a highlight right on the tip. You see how easy that is? Just erase part of it, put the pencil on its side, and boom. You drag it like that, and it makes it look like a fold has a highlight on it. It's a really efficient way of just simple sketching and making cloth or like saggy eyes look like they're working, Also, there should be a little bit of a shadow under the eyelid, because the eyelid has, it's a round eye, and it's a little bit darker with that skin or the eyelid hanging over it. So those are a couple little tricks that I do sometimes with eyes that really help them pop a little bit, okay? So, gosh, this is sure a lot of fun. I really had a great time doing this. I just was trying to get it done, and I didn't realize going back into it, I was going to end up with 60 gigabytes of video files that I was going to have to compress. The hard part is going to be seeing how to render this. I don't know if I should render it at 1080 and if it'll do it in 5 hours, or if I should do it at 720. And then the other hard part of rendering that is if the slightest little thing happens, if my Mac has a hiccup, if I render it on my PC and the PC falls asleep. I mean, you name it. There's like 10 different things that can happen. The power goes off. My air conditioner's running because it was super hot in California, and then all of a sudden there's a little flicker in power. Computers don't do well with flickers, especially if you have a video file rendering. Boom, it's gone, and I have to start all over. And I've had that happen before. So hopefully that will not be the issue here, because after I finish this voiceover, I have to go back and send this thing through to render, and I'm hoping I can do it. I'm really trying to keep most of my my newer demos at a full super high res 1080, so you could watch them on a large screen TV and still retain their detail. Hopefully they don't get rasterized, or the video doesn't, it gets recoded, and hopefully it doesn't get recoded to be too small, and then it doesn't read right or work as well on YouTube, because they do pass it through a encoder. In fact, I was just reading this article about video compression files and what's called H.265 and H.264, and 264 is like the new thing. Compresses files smaller, so it would make it smaller and allow it to read, but it reads it different. Anyway, you'd have to look it up to really understand it, but it affects the way that those of us in the art world, or just anyone on YouTube, I guess, when we're recording files and they're being recompressed and how they're being processed for the viewer to watch. So anyway, you also notice a lot, what I like to do is I like to jump around. So I might be on one fish and then I jump to another fish. And there's a reason for that. The reason is I know the way I work as an artist, and if I spend too much time on one fish, it's really easy for me to over detail it or put too much information in, and then I end up changing the look of the fish, and I don't want to do that. Now on this fish, I'm going a little bit darker with my textures on here, and there's a reason for that. The reason why I'm going darker here is because I'm going to end up shading the fish in the back to drop him backwards. I want him to look like he's in the back. Okay, so because of that, I'm pushing up a little bit more of his texture detail, so that way when I go to smudge over on top of him and then sort of blend him down, he'll pop back behind the other fish. Okay, so again, one of the importance, I think, of doing this is, I was just telling a student about this. He's like, yeah, I'd love working in Photoshop. I just want to be a concept artist. And I made a comment and said, have you had a rendering class? Like, no, what do I need a rendering class for? Rendering's boring, it's traditional. It's so important. I mean, I had like 2 or 3 rendering classes when I was younger, in my like late teens, like 19, and then in my 20s. And I think those are some of the most beneficial classes you could possibly have, because it really gives you a good understanding of how light hits objects, and then what that light does to the object's shape and form, what it does to the textures, how contour line and line wrap around an object to create form and visual read, and how things really start to work. And if you don't really have an understanding of how rendering works, you're going to have a really hard time, especially going digital with something. If you can't produce that with a traditional pencil, then you're going to have a real difficult time. You need to be able to do that. Okay. I like this fish in the back here. I really like. I'm going to start to push the values back here. See that? By pushing it like that, now if I smudge it, look at it. Boom, it drops right back behind that fish. Just the way I wanted it to do. And you're wondering, you're like, how do you pick that up? You know how I learned that? The truth? I learned that from going out and drawing trees and plants. That's right. Because when you draw trees and plants, as you're sitting there observing them, they drop back in atmospheric perspective. So the rule of atmospheric perspective is items that recede away from you are going to get smaller. And, that's scale, but they're going to get lighter. As they get smaller and they're going to get lighter, they're going to lose some of their overall value, and light's going to hit them and they're going to drop in terms of their overall value, no matter what color they are. So knowing that, and then looking at trees in different light conditions, and then looking at, let's say, like a plant in front of a big pine tree, and the pine tree's darker and the tree in front's getting hit by light. The dark tree makes the small tree in front pop out a little bit. And that's what I'm trying to do here. If I can get the fish in the back and his fins here to be a little bit darker, then they're going to make the fish on top of him and the other fishes around him pop out. And then my idea, sort of, while doing this at the very end, might be then to come in and really lightly what might look like some kelp sort of floating in the back. And if I can get that kelp in there, then that's going to make it also anchor the whole piece together too. Okay, so right now I like what I have here. I'm doing pretty good. I got pretty much my 5 fish in, and they're looking pretty good. Now it's just an issue of going in and defining up some of the details, some of the eyes and some of the other character elements to there. And I am starting to get a little bit too much into rendering, but you know what? That's okay. I wasn't trying to render the heck out of this. Just trying to do it quickly, but that's one of the golden things about this particular technique in this medium, is it being able to use Prismacolor and draw over your items really quickly and drop in shadows and then smear them and erase them and pull out highlights. It's really awesome. In fact, just looking at what I did here in a couple hours, part of me wanted to go back over this whole entire piece. Man, and I just wanted to go into it. I'm like, I could spend another half hour or 40 minutes just rendering it, and then you'd really get into some, really cool, nice detail. But you know what? I don't want to kill the drawing. If I keep rendering it too much, then it'll kill it. So I'm just searching for texture right now, and I really thought this fish in the back would just not be too appealing, and he'd have like that deep, like a real deep voice, and he'd have like these weird splotchy little skin things all over of dark and light, and then that just helps him become a little bit darker, and it's going to help him drop into the background a little bit more. So the texture I'm putting on the fish in the back, he is a little bit more textured, but he doesn't have as much contrast. He's going to be textured and a little bit more flattened out, because I'm going to come back and smear him down and continuously. So just like I'm smearing in here now, I'm going to start coming back and pushing this value down and smearing it down to make him drop behind the other fish. I sort of like him. He's like this big, dopey looking, prehistoric bottom feeder, Get some texture and pattern back in here too, especially right behind the eye right there. So I'm always thinking dark against light, right? So like the fish on the far right, if I get a little bit of dark under his chin, it pops the chin. The fish in the middle, if I get that little dark by the eye, it helps the eye pop. So that's another thing that's always sort of floating in the back of my brain whenever I'm drawing or sketching. Once I go to value or some type of detail or tone or gradient on top of my sketch, I'm always thinking about the contrast and think about where's the biggest visual reading, how do I get something to pop, and so on. I think that's why I like to jump around a little bit, work on one fish, go to another fish, do something else. And right now I really need to get this part to pop down behind the fish and really get that gradient to make the fish on top, the two fish on top, sort of pop out right there. But what's cool about this technique, folks, is that it's like a dirt cheap technique. I mean, God, all these people are walking around with their iPads and you know, doing all this other stuff. Don't get me wrong, I love iPads and I love that type of painting and sketching. That's cool. But man, this newsprint pad that I have here, it was like $6. It's $6 for a 100 sheet 12 by 18, and a Prismacolor pencil is like $1.50. So, I mean, you're looking at like maybe 10 or 15 bucks. That's like going out to get a sandwich, you know, or eating McDonald's or somewhere, getting a drink at Starbucks. It's like if you didn't get 2 drinks at Starbucks, you'd have enough paper and pencils to draw with for probably about 50 to like 70 hours of drawing. And to me, that's just crazy. You know, you could just sit and sketch like this, draw people, you could learn a new technique. There's so much you can learn from just having fun of sketching without having to feel like you need to spend a tremendous amount of money, you know, and have all this technology around you. Again, one of the things I really like is that 2 of the other artists that I work with at school, both of them, Frank Guthrie and Mike Sheehan, and we run the program together at school, and we all teach a variety of different classes, is that we all get it because we've been there. Digital software is only digital software. It's just a shortcut. You know, nothing replaces good old-fashioned traditional drawing techniques and the ability to just take a pencil, hold it sideways, and carve into a piece of paper and create something. I mean, you can't replace that with anything. It's worth its weight in gold. And I'm just such a firm believer on that. And whenever I have students in class, I just want to like drill it into their head, like, you need to be sketching in your sketchbook, you need to be working, sketching, comping, get some markers, Prismacolors, just have fun, you know, and just, there's so much you can do technique-wise. You can really create some really great, you know, work. So, because if you get really proficient at this, I mean, I learned a lot of this from from figure drawing and from working as a environment artist, just doing background design and layouts, is that I would use tracing paper all the time, and tracing paper has sort of a feel to this. The only difference is this is gray because it's a warm tone, and tracing paper is just a white, but tracing paper still has a lot of that same feel, and you can create a lot of the general feel of the gradients and the soft washes with tracing paper. The benefit is tracing paper is very forgiving. This isn't as forgiving. Like if somebody told me, hey Phil, we really like the other 4 fish, we don't like the fish in the back, take it out, I'd be like, there is no taking it out. I'd have to scan this into Photoshop and then select, you know, erase that fish out that way and then drop another fish behind it. And, you know, I wouldn't want to have to do that. But, I mean, just, it's so much fun to draw like this. I just can't even express it. So, working with Mike and Frank, one of the really cool things that we do is that we have just a variety of these cool classes, sketching for animators and illustrators, you know, and then we have, you know, the basic drawing for entertainment arts class. There's a whole bunch of other, we even have other illustration classes and other drawing classes that are all predicated around you really just learning how to sketch with like traditional techniques and traditional medium, and then you could take that and go forward with it. I mean, I'm doing this right now. Could you imagine if I scanned this into Photoshop and then started painting on top of it? I mean, it'd be really cool, right? And get some really great results, but all the drawing and all the hard work is there. And I really think, I mean, I don't think, I know for a fact, I know it just from years of drawing and practice, is you only get this way from drawing in a sketchbook and practicing on a regular basis. That's it. It's really the only way to do it. Excuse me. I'm gonna get some water there. I like this little guy. He's like a guppy meets one of those goldfish. You know, little goldfish with the big round eyes type of thing. I gotta admit, looking at some of those goldfish really inspired me with some of the fish ideas that I had here. I just thought they'd be fun. Yeah, I like this guy quite a bit. So I don't want to work too much on him because I don't want to kill him. What I mean by that is if I over detail it, I'm going to kill the drawing. And I don't want to do that. I want to have just enough to make that, like that fin pops right there. I want to have enough to make the body pop. By doing around the body and get a little bit more values towards the lower spherical base of his body here. And I can do that by pushing a little bit more of the core shadow, developing a little bit more of the lines in there. Yeah, the core shadow eye right there. Smudge that a little bit. Try to erase some of that. There, define the eyes a little bit more. Then just sort of, I'm going to just leave it alone and finish the other guy up on the top there. Yeah. I thought I'd put an extra fin on him, like maybe he has 2 fins on the bottom, and then he has an extra side fin to like turn himself left or right. I did something about this character, the way he might talk. You know, and like he'd be sitting there and he'd be talking like he barely moves his mouth. And every time he talks, bubbles pop out of his mouth. And then he has these little fins on the side that sort of Peter, or, you know, like they fluff a little bit and then he moves left or right. And he sort of he's so long and thin, he like has to balance himself upright. So I sort of like that light. It came out nice. Ended up working pretty good. All right, so as I'm working on this, I'm just going to keep, you know, trying to reinforce a couple things. One of the things that frustrates me when working with students is trying to get them to draw on their sketchbook on a daily basis. And the reason why it seems so hard to like try to convince people that if they want to get better, the secret to getting better is the mileage. And the more miles you draw on your sketchbook and the rough drawings you do, it's really the better you're getting because you're figuring out how to problem solve and, you know, going over form and line and contour and gradations and texture and light and shadow, and you're pulling all that together. So the more you're like being rough and just sketching, you start not to care about the drawing as much and you start just to have fun with it. And when you have fun with it, it really starts to like come alive a little bit, and there are parts of the character that sort of pop out, you know, and the only way to get that is to sit and sketch and have a good time and not to feel like, you know, every drawing you do is horrible. In fact, there's something to, I always mention that, there's something to really talk about that. You guys saw the thumbnails that I did. I was getting tired. Some of my drawings didn't look that great. Those were thumbnail sketches. They're not supposed to look super awesome. They're not portfolio pieces. They're drawings. Wait, hold on. Here comes the noise again. There it is. The more of those wonderful thumbnails that you do, the better that you get. It's really worth its weight in gold. And it's funny because this year I keep changing the way that I grade with projects at school. And this year I had to really sort of come down harsh on my students where, you know, especially when we're working in environments, also in character design, and I had students that like weren't doing thumbnails. I'm like, how could you do an environment and just come up with one idea and put it on paper? I mean, if you think drawing fish or characters are complicated, imagine drawing an environment where you have buildings and you have architecture and you have much more developed sense of composition. You have to make sure the rules of perspective are working. You have foreground, midground, and background. You have to understand light and shadow, angle of the light. I mean, there's so many more different things with an environment. How could you just skip that and go to one drawing? To me, that's just insane. That just shows me a lack of students sort of not caring, and that's not just not caring. I think they care, but they're also horrible at time management, and I think that has a lot to do with it, without a doubt. In fact, as I'm talking about this, because I'm just sitting here talking into a mic now, watching myself draw, voicing over this, but you know what? Time management is a real huge part of drawing and being successful. Successful. I'm actually getting tired. So time management and taking that time to really organize and putting time aside to devote to your skills and your craft will change who you are as a person. In fact, one of the things that I've spent more time doing as a teacher is I spend more time, sometimes not always talking about drawing, but more time talking about understanding scheduling, understanding your priorities, about deferred gratification. Deferred gratification means moving the things that you want right now and putting them aside to do other things first. Like, for example, drawing. You don't need to play Xbox for 10 hours. Don't get me wrong. There's this game that I love to play, and I'm totally addicted to it. In fact, for any of you cell phone geeky gamers out there, I'm going to start it up for you and see if you can guess what game it is. Here it goes. Is it going? Oops. Here it is. This is the most addictive game in the world called Iron Force. It's a tank game, and you go around and blow up other people's tanks, and don't even play it because it's a money pit. You put like $20 into it, and the next day you put 10, then another 20, then another 10, and then you get your credit card bill and you're like, where'd $75 go to? That's what happens. Anyway, my point is that's my reward. Is that if I sit and do a good drawing, or I get up in the morning and I sketch for a couple hours in my sketchbook, then I get to sit and play my tank game for like 10 minutes, and that's my reward. So a huge part of time management and becoming really good at drawing and designing is managing out your time to have work time and then to have a reward time. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm sketching in an idea of having kelp in the back, because my fish have some nice little textures and white highlights on them. So this is turned into a character design sketch, and now it's going a little bit more into an illustration. But the fact it only took about 2 hours, I'm happy with it, and I'll leave it at that. Because I could easily do something, I could crank out another one in like another 2 hours, and I feel proud of that. So I'm going to leave it at that. So altogether, I'm probably about 3.5 hours on this whole thing, from doing the thumbnails, gathering a little bit of reference, and then also when I was in my sketchbook. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to put a light value down here, just really light with the pencil. I'm barely pressing it down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to smudge that. And that should create a very soft blue backdrop that, when positioned behind some of the characters' body parts and highlights, should allow the characters to pop forward a little bit more off the page. That's the purpose of what I'm doing right now, okay? So I'm just trying to, it's funny because as I was doing this, I'm not really looking at kelp, and it sort of looked like I had flames there for a minute, like my fish were being lit on fire, but let's just pretend it's kelp for the demo's sake, right? Right, okay? But it would be cool, could you imagine, it's like you're drawing and sketching and you spending a lot of time in your sketchbook. If I could knock one of these out, and this is like a good rough for me, imagine knocking out like 5 more of these over a couple days, and then the other rough sketches. Imagine where I would be at day 5 of drawing fish. Oh my God, I would just be like, I would be killing it. I'd be so into it because my brain would be so used to the shape recognition and the shape language, and I'd always be problem solving and coming up with some new ideas. And that has a lot to do with pushing yourself to that upper level, right? So this is really just like day 2 for me, of sketching with this idea. So man, if I went back into this, especially if I had to do something very realistic, this is more stylized and animated, but point being is that, the more you sketch, the more you draw, the more you're in that sketchbook, the better you get. It really is just like the golden secret, and then give yourself just a little reward with your time management. Maybe you get to play an hour of Xbox. Another reward for me is I like sweets. So I buy a bag of gummy bears and I can have like a couple gummy bears. That's my little snack. Or I go for a walk sometimes. There's a couple hills around my house and I just go for a quick walk. Opens up my eyes, especially if I've been looking at something and concentrating for a while. I start to get a little bit tired of looking at the same detail and I need to get out of the house for a little bit. Or the same thing at a studio. When I was at the last studio I was at full time was Warner Brothers, and I was working on Batman, the Brave and the Bold. I'd be drawing. Sometimes I was in there for 8 to 10 hours a day drawing, and I would just walk outside and take a break and just, look around at the lot. It was really cool. We had a lot where they filmed part of all these houses, and they filmed Mel Gibson there. Mel Gibson, I can't even talk. Excuse me, my brain's on empty right now. They filmed Danny Glover and Mel Gibson there in the movie Lethal Weapon, which was really cool. They have these houses that they reuse over and over, which is pretty cool. So I just go for a walk, on the main lot in the studio, and it's just cool to like get outside a little bit, So I'm almost wrapped up with this, and I'm pretty happy with it. I like how it's developed, I like the kelp. So I don't know if you guys like it or not, but I like the kelp being behind the characters. It just rests back there, and it's just sort of simple, and it allows your eyes to sort of bounce around. You still see the fish, but you can bounce around a little bit. Now what I'm doing is I'm coming in with some whites to put a couple little white highlights. As I work forward here with my highlights, let me finish this kelp here. I'm going to show you the different pens that I have here. I have a Prismacolor pen. I have a felt tip pen. I have a Daiso white marker pen right here. Okay, and those three work pretty great for highlights right there. I have another one that I haven't shown you yet. I'm going to pull that out in just a minute. It's a Uniball Signio gel pen. So this is a Prismacolor pencil right here. You have to be very careful with this. Let me show you why. Because it puts white down, but if you put blue down and then you hit it with white again, it goes into light blue. Do you see that? And it makes it ugly. That's bad. Okay, so if you use it as just white on the paper alone, you can get some really nice highlights with it. So you have to think about where your highlights might be and then erase little parts of that. So it works great for like little edges, little highlights, reflective light, and maybe even some like primary highlights on something. It works pretty good. Here's the Insignio gel pen. I discovered this on Jet Pens one day. It works fantastically. It's a gel pen, so it gives through like a little roller ball, little nice highlights, but it doesn't work as broad as the Prismacolor pencil does. And remember, there's a difference. One is like ink. This one here is more like a wax. I'm spreading the wax on. So if I put this white wax from the Prismacolor pencil on top of the drawing itself, it's going to turn it blue, and it's going to get very muddy, and it's not going to work too good. Okay, and that's why the pen on the upper left-hand corner here, this little Japanese correction pen here, it doesn't matter if some people use the term whiteout from the old brand or correction fluid. What's really great, it has a little shaker. If you can hear that shaker inside it, there's white fluid in there, and that fluid's like a paint, and it's super bright highlight. Watch. The problem is these usually have a broad tip, and see that? Boom, I touch the eyes, bam, it makes those eyes pop out immediately. So this is great for those white little highlights, and it's portable. Now I bought this one from a Daiso store. I paid I'm a little disappointed. I paid like $2.50 for it, and there's really not that much ink inside it. So I'm like, come on, Daiso. For $2, I expect to have a little bit more than that, There's another brand that works really good. It's the, let me read it to you right here. It's called just a correction pen by Liquid Paper. That one has a little bit more ink in it. It tends to last a little bit longer, okay? So I'm just coming along, trying to pop the eyes, highlights, and then I'm trying to put a couple highlights on a couple edges, like on the sphere of the eyes, on some of the eyelids, just to get the fish to pop out a little bit more, And by the way, I always do this. Whenever I'm drawing into my sketchbook, I flip to the very back page, and I use that to test ink and so on to see if, how things are working or if there's any issues or problems with it. It's a simple, easy way. Now I'm just coming along here, putting some more highlights on here. You can see what that white does to pop the eyes a little bit here. It works pretty efficiently, and just got to be careful. Erase if you have to, then put the white down. Otherwise, that white's going to mix with that blue, and it's going to turn into a nasty little light blue bit of muddiness, and you don't always want that to happen. Okay? Push a couple more values. Now I'm looking at this fish on the left, and I could come back to him and put even a couple more little highlights on him, but you know what? If I put too much on him, I think he has a lot of texture on him, and if I put too many highlights besides just the teeth, then it might be a little bit too much, So I'm almost tempted just to sort of leave them and not deal with them. And I just have an old junky piece of white paper here, yellow paper that I use. I push the white out on it, the liquid paper correction fluid, to see how it's flowing. And then sometimes it makes a little puddle. It comes out all at once. And then I just dab back in that puddle and then touch it back on the drawing. And see, I just did the teeth right there, and it really makes the teeth pop and the eyes. It's a really simple, great technique. Actually, to give credit where that's due, I learned that from the amazing Paul Felix, who used to do that with some of his environments from way back in the day, many years ago, many moons ago. I got to take a class with him, and he talked about putting highlights on some of his environmental drawings, and that's something that stayed with me ever since. So anyway, we're almost done here, folks. I'm just going to wrap it up, and I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for watching and leaving feedback, and I really appreciate it. And I'm just been super crazy with school. Things should lighten up a little bit now over summer. I should be able to get quite a few more demos out. So, there'll be more to come here, and I just need to get caught up on my editing. I'm making a habit, even when I'm sitting and sketching in Photoshop, I just hit the recorder on, and then I just got to bring it home and voice over it. So I'll have a little bit more. And again, I mentioned this earlier, I like to hear a little bit from you guys. If there's something particular you'd like to have a demo on or something, I'm afraid I'm going to get 100 million responses. But if there's something particular that you're struggling with, because there's a lot of things I take for advantage, like construction, basics of like figure drawing or drawing with shape, or even there's some good perspective questions sometimes. If there's something I can help you with, let me know. So I'm going to go ahead and sign my name here, put a little P over a D, put it in a little square box, and I'm going to wrap it up. And there's my demo on comping out some fish for character design. Okay, so take care, everyone. Keep on drawing. Bye-bye. And I wanted to give a special thanks and shout out to bensound.com for the free background music that I can place inside my videos. That's absolutely wonderful and totally free. Thanks. Take care.